A popular sugar substitute is slated to be declared a possible carcinogen this coming Friday by the World Health Organization, prompting rampant public concerns and industry efforts for countermeasures. So what is aspartame and its potential health effects? What are health experts and regulators beyond the WHO saying? And what has been the response from the food and drink industry? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. Today we address the fresh scrutiny on the potential health implications of aspartame. For more on this, I have Dr. David Kwak from Soon Chun Hyang University here in the studio with us. Dr. Kwak, it's been a while. Welcome back.
It has been a while. Thanks for having me.
I also have Kwon Soa with us. Well, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
Right, so then we'll begin with you. Let's start off with some background information behind the fresh scrutiny over the health implications of aspartame.
Right, aspartame, one of the world's most common and popular artificial sweeteners that you find in your daily diet Coke as a replacement for sugar, is being reviewed for its safety or even potential link to cancer. The sweetener has been used and approved by global food regulators for decades. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has given the safety green light 5 times since 1981, and over 90 countries around the world are approving the use as well, including Korea. However, its safety has been controversial for years as well, with some studies suggesting that people consuming larger amounts of artificial sweeteners having had an increased risk of cancer. The World Health Organization decided to take a closer look at aspartame and its potential health risks. On July 14th, so Friday, 2 reports are expected to be published, one by the World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer and one by the WHO's Joint Expert Committee on Food Additives. The food and beverage industry is watching closely as the assessment could have huge impacts on future production. Aspartame is the ingredient in diet sodas like Coke Zero Sugar, Diet Coke, Sprite Zero, Pepsi Zero Sugar, Mountain Dew Zero Sugar, and so forth. And also it's the ingredient in other items such as ice cream, chewing gum, sugar-free jam, yogurt, cough drops, and even in toothpaste. Meanwhile, the WHO earlier this year, in a separate guideline on non-sugar sweeteners, advised not to use aspartame for weight control, suggesting there aren't any long-term benefits in terms of reducing body fat, and moreover mentioning the potential risk of undesirable effects such as an increased risk of type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, and also mortality in adults.
Right, and staying with that, Dr. Kwak, perhaps speaking as a scholar yourself and a doctor, could you tell us a bit more about aspartame and its potential health effects?
Well, so I just pretty much gave us a very good review of it. Aspartame, as we all know now, is an artificial sweetener, mostly used in carbonated drinks and something that is rather cold than warm. I want to iterate that fact because there are other types of artificial sweeteners that serves the same purpose, except it's being used in other types of food sources, such as something that could become hot, such as in bakeries and etc. Now, health effects, there have been many studies that try to review either how beneficial it would be to human beings or it wouldn't be. There have been many speculations. There have been reviews that actually review correlation of artificial sweetener, not particularly aspartame, to people having dementia, which found a very mild correlation. So let me also emphasize that fact. But there have also been studies that correlated uses of aspartame to possible cancer occurrences. Now, all these reviews are rather not thorough in a sense that it's sporadic. It's not something that's definitely depicting on strong correlation between aspartame and what we're currently worried about, the cancer. So I think it's rather early at this point to make a complete decision on what to consider of aspartame, but rather, judging from our many years of use with aspartame already, there have not been that many cases of actual cancer solely due to aspartame. So I think it's more important clinically that we take away point from that factor.
Right, I see. And before we move forward, Dr. Kwak, could you tell us a bit about, because you spoke about the presence of other sugar substitutes, and that being said, how does aspartame perhaps differ from sucralose, I believe?
Right, so sucralose is yet another type of artificial sweetener. As I mentioned just briefly earlier, the biggest difference between sucralose and aspartame is the fact that it has differences in sustainability in heat. So aspartame is known to sustain better in cold as opposed to sucralose being sustained better in the heat. So it's more often used in bakeries and other products that goes through heat for processing, as opposed to aspartame being used rather in cold drinks and etc. Now there is also a couple of other differences. The biggest of those is the fact that aspartame is about 200 times sweeter than the regular sugar, as opposed to sucralose being about 600 times being sweeter than sugar. So its usage of dosages in regular products would differ by that much as well. Meaning, if I were to consume aspartame, calculating the differences in proportion between sucralose and aspartame, if I want to get the same level of sweetness, I would probably use about 3 times as much of aspartame than sucralose. But that's not really totally being realistic, because they're currently being used in different purposes.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, so with regard to aspartame, the World Health Organization is poised to make public its findings on Friday. That would be July 14th, that is tomorrow. What are we expecting?
Well, Sunny, according to an exclusive by Reuters late last month, the International Agency for Research on Cancer is expected to label aspartame as possibly carcinogenic to humans. And that will translate into the existence of evidence linking the sweetener to cancer, but that evidence being limited. So let's take a look at how the WHO's cancer research arm, the IARC, categorizes carcinogenicity. So here you can see 5 groups. So the first group, group 1, says carcinogenic to humans. So that would mean a substance that there is enough evidence to conclude that a substance can cause cancer in humans. Then we have group 2A, which says probably carcinogenic to humans when there's strong evidence that a substance can cause cancer in humans, but if there is not conclusive, if it's not conclusive as of present. Then group 2B says possibly carcinogenic to humans in the case there is some evidence that a substance or agent can cause cancer in humans, but at present it is far from conclusive. And this group is what we're expecting to be categorized for aspartame. Group 3, in group 3, that means there is no evidence at present that a substance can cause cancer in humans, and group 4 means there is strong evidence that a substance does not cause cancer in humans. So as I said again, group 2B is what we're expecting regarding aspartame based on the leaked information cited in the media. So you might be wondering what else is on the list of group 2B. There would be diesel, talc, nickel, infection with HIV type 2, working with asphalt, and I also believe that working too much was categorized as that as well. But also Asian-style pickled vegetables, including Korea's famous side dish kimchi, bracken ferns, and aloe vera are also said to be in this category. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're expecting 2 reports on Friday, one being the one by the IARC, with the main focus being on whether the sugar substitute is a carcinogen or a cancer-causing substance or not. And the other report by the Joint Expert Committee on Food Additives is expected to provide a guidance on the appropriate daily intake of aspartame. Because in many cases of substances that have the ability to cause cancer, it really depends on the amount that you consume for it really to be carcinogenic.
Right, and before we talk about the amount, Dr. Kwak, I understand talk about Asian pickled vegetables being linked to the risk of gastric cancer, I believe, has been around for quite a while. What more can you tell us about this?
Right. So the correlation of Asian pickled foods versus cancer has actually been proven, and there have been many thorough reviews, which proves up to about 50 to even almost 100% that it could cause more occurrences of cancers in people. But it is very different from what we are discussing today because there have also been made so I'm trying to find the appropriate word here, but possibly speculation of what would cause it. It's namely what's called nitrate and nitrites. It's the byproducts of preservatives and cooking processing that gets used in preservation of these pickled foods. Once consumed in human beings, going through the very harsh acidity in the stomach, it becomes what's called nicotinamide. I'm forgetting the word. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sorry about that. So the nicotinamide is actually a very strong carcinogen, and that's what is directly related to cancer-causing carcinogens. But however, the nitrite and nitrate, because it's rather indirectly correlated, for the time being, that puts this Asian pickle food category under 2B instead of anything above. However, as Soa also mentioned, the terminology, the keyword ADL, the appropriate daily intake is very, very important because these categories do not care about how much we have to consume in order to be able to even possibly get cancer. So, for example, the ADI for aspartame is currently at about 50 milligrams per kilogram of human body weight, as guided by FDA. That means per FDA, if I were to consume the maximum level of aspartame allowed, today, I would have to take about 40 kilograms of the powder. So in regular dosages, as we consume in beverages, it is nowhere near being considered for being carcinogens.
Right, I see. Dr. Kwak, what can you tell us about the classification that the WHO has with regard to carcinogenicity, which is something that Soa shared earlier on?
Right, so it was already reviewed, but it classifies these categories into being completely non-carcinogenic, then probably carcinogenic, and possibility of being carcinogenic, and no way of being carcinogenic. So these categories, if officially placing a food sources by the WHO in any of the categories, obviously would stir up the whole general takes of these foods, and people will become very scared to further consume these products. But as I just mentioned earlier, it doesn't regard anything at all for the amount of these resources that a person has to take in. So it's rather debatable whether or not these categories are appropriately placing these resources into each of them.
Right, I see. This is an impromptu question, but Dr. Kwak, we are told, and do correct me if I'm wrong, we're told that the sun causes skin cancer. Is that a fact that we can all agree on?
Yes.
And if that is the case, though, we don't avoid the sun entirely.
Right.
Can I link that to the idea of consuming aspartame then?
Yes, and partially, I would like to say, because also from the sun, we try to protect ourselves by putting sunscreens on. So if now we know that aspartame has some sort of a relationship to causing cancer, obviously people would start to take measures to be careful in trying not to consume too much of it.
Right, so there would be more cautious consumption with regard to aspartame, I see. So authorities here in Korea, I believe, they've also responded to recent concerns over aspartame, right?
Right, South Korea's Ministry of Food and Drug Safety said it plans to carry out its own assessment regarding the potential health risks concerning aspartame once the WHO-led results are released. However, as I mentioned before, Korea, just like the US FDA, has been approving the substance for years, and authorities and experts here are being cautious for now as the issue could overly raise unnecessary phobia. And this has been with us since 1965. That's when it's been detected or found found. And as I said, since the 1980s, it's been approved in many countries for consumption. Now, also the ministry released some figures that showed the average South Korean's intake of the sweetener is 0.12% of the acceptable daily intake that Dr. Kwak also mentioned earlier. So the ADI is a measure of the amount of a specific substance that can be ingested on a daily basis over a lifetime without being exposed to health risk. A ministry official said in order for the amount of aspartame intake to reach the ADI, an adult weighing 60 kilograms would have to drink 33 750 milliliter bottles of makgeolli every day, which is traditional Korean rice wine. And other comparisons made were 55 cans of 250 milliliter zero sugar sodas and 300 bags of chips a day. We will have to wait and see what the government's response will look like once Friday's reports are out. But it would require several producers from local regulators before changing any rules to aspartame consumption. So there won't be any direct results in Korea soon. And there might be no regulations at all, as we had a previous case in 2015 when the IARC announced processed meat and red meat as being carcinogenic and probably be carcinogenic. So local regulators back then, they did conduct their own separate assessments, but did not implement additional tightenings regarding the consumption of those processed meats.
Right, and talking about consumption, I suppose the risk of cancer then with regard to aspartame would be if you took quite a heavy dose of aspartame every day then.
Yes.
That being said then, Dr. Kwak, is there a completely safe sugar substitute?
Well, it's hard for me to actually come up with an alternative chemical to aspartame. Aspartame currently is probably safer than other sweeteners in a sense that it doesn't bring up sugar level once consumed. So the other sweeteners we just briefly talked about, they are currently found to still bring up the sugar level. It used to be that diabetic people took drinks with other sweeteners so that they could manage and contain their blood sugar level while still drinking the sweetened drinks. Except nowadays it's found that those drinks still bring up the sugar level somewhat. It's not totally 100% as if they drank a sugar-rated water, but they still bring up about 17 to about 20%. Now, that being said, aspartame-sweetened drinks, they do not. So I think for the time being, it has its own pros and cons. The pros is obviously the easily usabilities in soft drinks and whatnot. Cons, I guess, the newer studies that are coming up with all these different information. So I do not disagree with the fact that we should be careful and be more conservative in taking in these newly developed substances, even though aspartame isn't. But I think, realistically speaking, drinking in the amount that we're currently consuming is perfectly fine.
Right, I see. And moving forward, so how is the food and drink industry here in Korea responding to these concerns? You mentioned makgeolli earlier on. I had no idea that aspartame went into makgeolli.
There is. I actually haven't thought about it either. But food and beverage companies were really quick to respond, regardless of the reports having been made official yet, including a likely recommendation for daily intake. So already some manufacturers have declared to take out the ingredient of their products. Others vowed to find an alternative. So makgeolli makers, for instance, are looking into various measures to address the situation, with Seoul Jangsu, a makgeolli producer that accounts for some 40% of the traditional Korean alcohol, or also referred to as rice wine, saying it will take joint actions with makgeolli producers if aspartame is classified as a carcinogen, and is also considering changes to their recipes. Now, CU, a major convenience store, already introduced an aspartame-free makgeolli last week. It's only made out of water, rice and fermentation starter. And top confectionery brands like Arirang and Crown Hete have also taken preemptive actions to substitute aspartame. And pharmaceutical companies have also started discussions on potentially using alternatives to aspartame, as their fever-reducing syrups for children, for instance, contain aspartame as well. Following the news on the forecasted reports on the sweeteners, some companies were also quick to make clear that their products actually are aspartame-free. For instance, Coca-Cola Korea, Haidt Jilo, which is a famous soju maker, Lotte Wellfood, all announced that none of their products include aspartame. Kwangdong Pharmaceuticals, the producer of vitamin drinks Vita 500 and Vita 500 Zero, also stressed its beverages are aspartame-free. The fast move from the industry apparently is a prevention from drastically dropping sales, as the IARC report could directly lead to such results. Despite experts and authorities' suggestions to not overly react to a new assessment, at first a negative public perception may be difficult to avoid, at least in the short term. And some pundits are actually also concerned over long-term effects because immediately sugar-free drinks that do not contain aspartame, they might be having benefits from this. However, in the long term, it could have a negative impact on the zero sugar market as a whole.
Right. And beyond aspartame, Dr. Kwak, Soa earlier mentioned the link between red meat and the risk of cancer. Now, I find myself going to restaurants and asking for my steak to be done medium rare. How worried should I be?
I'm not going to worry you with the information, hopefully, but NHS from the UK actually has a formal guideline on people who consume too much of red meat products, such as that from beef, lamb, and pork. They should, if they're consuming anything above 90 grams after cooking, should reduce it down to 70 grams or less, because there had been proven correlation between red meats and colorectal cancer. And that has been studied over and over, which proves the same thing. So red meat, if consumed too much and eccentrically, such as a non-balanced diet, do have the danger of causing cancer, so we should be careful. But once again, the main point is that we should have rather a balanced diet, which has proportional constituents of each of the ingredients, except just complete meat-only meals.
Right, and of course, going back to the idea of cautious consumption then, with regard to meat as well as aspartame. Dr. Kwak, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Soa, thank you for your insights.
Thank you, as always.
Right, well, that brings us to the end of this edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow. That is Friday.